decades and decades. That's all they do is they fight and kill people, and nobody gets anything. And this is strong peace, really strong peace.
Director of the Center of Middle East Studies at the University of Denver in Colorado. He joins us now live. Thanks so much for being with us. I mean, is today a historic day? Is this a real monumental step toward peace, as President Trump has been saying, or does it throw more turmoil into the landscape of Middle East politics?
Yeah, it's the latter. It's not a historic day for peace. I think it's a stepping stone to greater regional instability. Look, just reflect on the key participants in this agreement. On the one hand, you have a racist American president and his corrupt son-in-law who come together with a neo-fascist Israeli prime minister and two Arab dictators. And then behind the scenes, just to add to this scenario, you have the notorious figure of the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who's sort of a key advisor and consultant to this agreement. How could anything good come out of an agreement by these ghastly figures? So on that measure alone, there's need for deep skepticism. The fact that this agreement is being celebrated in some capitals around the world, particularly here in the United States, is simply a reflection, a window into the deep distortions and deep biases that exist here in the United States with respect to U.S. Middle East policy. This is a policy that's based on a relationship with dictators, despots, and occupiers. So an agreement that's premised on a relationship with these notorious figures, completely ignoring the aspirations of the Palestinians and completely ignoring public opinion in the Arab and Islamic world, that's not an agreement that's going to stand the test of time.
Okay. I mean, again, we're back to wondering what the end game really is. Is there a real solution for the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians here? Because as we were talking about earlier with our correspondents in Palestine, there's not enough Palestinian leadership and unity among the leadership there, and there's issues of corruption, of course, there as well. Many people say that's why Palestinian aspirations have failed. How does any of it actually, while we say we're seeing the Palestinians thrown under the bus in these agreements, what was the alternative?
Well, no, you raise a good question, and I think you're absolutely right. The reason why this agreement is happening, in part, it's happening because of the monumental failure and corruption of the Palestinian leadership. The Palestinian people deserve a credible leadership. The current characters in Ramallah are really a joke. They don't represent anyone except themselves. And I think that's why we're facing this crisis. So that's a big reason, that's a big obstacle. In terms of your earlier question, what's the solution? The solution is crystal clear. There's been a solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict on the table for a very long time, and that is a solution that lies within the framework of international law. Israel is allowed to exist within its 1967 borders, guaranteed by international law, and a Palestinian state should emerge in the territories occupied in the 1967 war. Now, that was the position of the Arab League. That was the position that Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and all of the members of the Arab League subscribed to. One by one, we're seeing them drop that position, and they're dropping that position for sort of narrow reasons that have to do with the security of the dictatorships that these heads of state are in charge of. I think they have. I think the big driver here, the big sort of reason why this is happening at this point in time, is that many of these Arab despotic regimes realize that there's an election in the United States, that Donald Trump might lose that election, and that Joe Biden will not be as supportive and as accommodating to their internal policies and their regional policies as the current occupant in the White House. And so that explains, the why now question.
Okay. Let me focus a little bit, at least, on Bahrain, because it was interesting. There was resistance from Bahrain at first. They were kind of signaling that they weren't going to sacrifice their Palestinian brothers unless Israel gave some kind of guarantee. You were hoping that they were saying, yes, we would have further talks about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Something obviously changed Bahrain's mind You were talking about how they're hoping to secure the dictatorships that might be under threat. But is it more about securing this alliance really against Iran that they see as the real threat against their hold on power, especially Bahrain?
Well, clearly, there are tensions and rivalries between the Arab Gulf states and Iran. That can't be ignored. But I think in many ways, Iran is the excuse here. The reason why Bahrain has signed on to this agreement is because they've gotten the green light and the approval of Saudi Arabia. Bahrain is a small, weak state. It's essentially a vassal state of Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudi crown prince has given the green light to the Bahrainis to move in this direction. And that Bahrainis, their biggest fear, the ruling family that is in Bahrain, the House of Khalifa, their biggest fear is not Iran. Their biggest fear is their own citizens and the fear of democracy. They rule over a restive population. They brutally crushed the peaceful and non-sectarian Arab Spring uprising in 2011. And they think that by signing the security agreement with Israel, it will give them greater access to political power in Washington, and that there will be a regional backer of their repressive rule. So the next time that there's an Arab Spring uprising in Bahrain, they're hoping that the Israelis and the Americans, if possible, will come to their rescue. That's very much what this is about. I don't put a lot of stock on this claim that this is all about Iran. Iran is the excuse. The big fear is the security of these dictatorships who rule over restive populations that don't consider these ruling families as legitimate.
Nader Hashemi, great to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.